Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Walsh, come on in. Welcome to the second quarterly review meeting for the town of Fairfield, Connecticut. Everyone, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. At this point, I'm going to ask our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Bob Merritt, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started tonight, today was a terrible day for our town, for one family in particular, and as well as for a police officer, who shows that that job is a very difficult job and very hard to understand what you're going to have to go through on a day-to-day basis. Several of us, including Mr. Mottola and myself, know the family very well and feel very badly for them tonight. They're in our thoughts and prayers, all of them, and it's nice to know that when they do get better, this community will be there for them. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for the victims of today's event. Thank you very much. Tonight we have several items on the agenda. I want to apologize to my colleagues first off, which I don't really like to start a meeting like that. But there are some voting items on this agenda that I was told that we need to vote either yay or nay sooner rather than later because there are grants attached to these, and there is some concern that if they can't move forward with these, that grant money won't be available. So that is one of the reasons why those items actually made it onto the agenda of a quarterly meeting. Tonight, we're going to review the Board of Education financial position first, as Dr. Title also has a Board of Education meeting to go to. By the way, they stole our room. Second of all, we're going to receive the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFA, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2015 from Cone Resnick. We have a presentation from that. We're going to review our current status of our town's pension and OPEB funds. Then we have this series of grants related to public works, and Mr. Michelangelo is here to walk us through those. And finally, we have a follow-on item that I will speak to at the time related to a $200,000 resolution for some computer server room renovation. I've got some new information on that. And then lastly, to hear the town's financial position through the second quarter. Any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move number 8 up. The reason is I think that we should just hear the quarterly, kind of in the way we normally hear the quarterly, not only for ourselves, but also I think for the public who, when they turn on Fair TV or want to watch this, are expecting to hear our quarterly report, and I think it'd be better for all involved if that's what they're tuning in for, that we hear it all together. And I don't see any reason why these other matters that were added on, they're all add-ons after that, can't be just done after that.
I don't have any problem with that. Mr. Mayor, do you see any problem with that order?
None.
Great. So if it pleases the board, I'll take number 8 as number 4 when we get to it.
Great, thanks.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, at this point I'm going to ask Dr. Title to come forward. Thank you, sir. To review the Board of Education second quarter financial position. Welcome.
I'm solo tonight because we're covering a couple things. I drew the long straw, actually. You can think about that for a second. So we have 2 documents. One is the quarterly financial report that we presented to the board recently, and also you have a copy of the most recent medical retention fund report as well, which I can speak to briefly.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Mr. Mayor has the hard copy. Sorry, I thought you gentlemen knew. I'm good. Go ahead, Dr. Title, sorry for the interruption.
No, that's no problem. So I'll start with the quarterly financial report document for the quarter ending December 31st, 2015. There aren't a lot of changes in this report from the one you saw in the first quarter. It does look like on the personnel front, we're going to be pretty much break even for the year. Discussed this at the last quarter, that the additional retirements are pretty much offset by the additional staff we needed to hire because of the way the enrollment shifted. So that it's not going to go in the red, but typically there are savings in there by the end of the year. We don't see that happening in personnel services this year. The health insurance looks to be is pretty much just a lump sum payment for the year. Pupil personnel is still a wild card because of the special ed excess cost grant. It does look like we're entitled this year to about $3.5 million, and you've got a negative $3.3 million in the category, so it looks like once it's received, we're going to be okay there. It's always a discussion point. You know, we carry this large negative number, and then people say, when's it going to go away? It looks like that will be fine. That was not taken as a cut in the most recent attempt by the legislature to balance the state budget. I will tell you that was cut in the governor's budget for 16-17, but that won't affect the current year. But for the first time in anybody's memory, there's actually a proposal to reduce special ed excess cost funding to cities and towns by $8 million, about 6% of the total funding, which is a problem, of course, in our budget, which is already done, and moving on to you shortly on the order of about $250,000. So that's not a quarterly financial issue because this year we're quote-unquote safe, but it's just a sign. Now, of course, that can change. The legislature can get pressure and say, why are you doing this? And they could change their minds. Unfortunately, they won't change their minds until after the budget process is done here, as they typically do their budget right before the session ends, which is in the first Wednesday in May, and that's too late for us, but that's just happening. So if you saw that somewhere, it doesn't impact this, but it does impact next year's budget. The rest of the expenses are pretty much as they've been. We're still in good shape on utilities and overtime. Finally had some cold weather and some overtime for some storms, but so far that's been manageable, and those look like those will be within budget at this moment, but the weather is changeable here and things happen. So, and capital really hasn't changed much. So overall, I would expect we'll finish this year, in the black. I don't believe there'll be any substantial leftover dollars for any purpose at all. Because generally those come out of the personnel lines, and that's not going to be there this year. So I think we're going to, obviously we will be there at 0 or better, but I don't expect that there's going to be an opportunity to contribute anything anywhere, but you never know. So I'll stop with that, or unless you want me to talk about medical retention and then take questions, whatever you want to do, Tom.
Let's talk about the budget first.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Title. Questions for Dr. Title? Mr. Walsh.
If this El Nino continues, you expect that there would be potential savings for energy, substantial?
Yeah, I don't know how substantial it would be, but yeah, I could see some savings in there. The other, if we really, we budget about $100,000 for snow removal. Typically, that's not been enough. We've almost always gone over on that. So it's possible there could actually be savings there. If we didn't get any snow between now and the end, the end of March, we could have some savings in that account. We could get some savings potentially in the staff overtime. Again, all depending on the weather. If we make it till the end of March, we go to the third quarter, we'll have obviously a much better handle on all those numbers between now and then. We still hold back on some things just in case, because we know that you can have a week of sub-zero temperatures and 2 feet of snow like we did last year, and all of a sudden all those savings evaporate. But Right now, it's possible we could have savings there right now, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Brown?
Dr. Title, on PP&E expense on tuition, was there a transfer?
So, on the purple personnel services, we don't actually do a transfer there because that, in the major classification, because the tuition and the services for the outside mental health consultant are both within that major classification. So there would be no need to transfer out of pupil personnel services. Where you'd see it is on the summary object account, which is, well, it's labeled page 1 of 2. It's the second to last page. You'll see a $595,000 transfer within the category.
Right, that's what I'm looking
Yes, okay, so that's why you'll see it there, but it doesn't show up on the previous page, which is the statement of account summary by major classification.
for. Okay.
Right, and that's the increased mental health services we're providing at the high school and the lower number of kids being outplaced as a result.
Right, and there's an initiative to keep students in district?
It's
Currently-
both to keep students in and to bring students back. The bring students in, obviously, for this year has already occurred. We're now working on potential students who might be able to come back in next year. It's a little more difficult to bring students back, particularly at the high school level, when they've been outplaced for a while and maybe they're comfortable and they're being successful. But there are some families that are looking to get their children back into the school system. Where we really see it pay off is in the number of outplacements that have not happened. In fact, at the last count, there hadn't been a high school outplacement because of a mental health concern since we started this program. Normally, by this time of year, you've got 8 or 9 of them. So it's really been preventative in that sense. I think it's only been maybe 2 or 3 kids back. But 2 or 3 kids back at 80 grand a kid
Right,
is real money. So it doesn't take long to get to 600,000.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, we'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Dr. Tuttle, at our last quarterly report, we had talked about, your obviously biggest fear going forward was at that point in time the special education costs, and that clearly you didn't know where that was going to stand with, because applications were due in December.
Right.
And I asked you whether at the next quarterly you thought you might be able to give us an update on where that stood. Do you have an update?
Right, so I think we're in good shape on that. I said I think we're going to get what we expected.
Okay.
There's one more stab at this when we file again in March. The state will tell us what they expect the percentage will be. So we're never completely off the pins and needles until we make the second filing, because the state only has a certain amount of money. And if there's a lot of claims on it, they'll say, well, we told you were going to get 3.5, but guess what? A lot of claims came in, it's only going to be 3.2. And they have to do it that way because the legislature appropriates a fixed sum, and it doesn't take much. So right now, we look like we're going to be in good shape on that. I think we're going to be, that account, pupil personnel services typically goes over somewhat because of a lot of issues, but it looks like we're going to be okay on the state excess cost for this year.
Did we have an increase in applications, or approximately what you thought we were going to have?
Yeah, we were right about on what we thought, pretty close to the budget number, and the state's accepted it, so I think we're in pretty good shape on that.
Great, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Dr. Tito on the budget itself? Basically, not much change from last quarter. You still expect to be in the black. There's no specific items that you're worried about. The real telltale things are what happens with the state grants, as well as what happens with the weather and the utility costs.
That's about it.
Okay.
Yep.
With that, let's go to the medical retention.
Sure. We've shortened up the form you used to see from us.
Sure.
And I think actually Mr. Mayor does it in his form, which is similar to this. But because we're changing our health insurance, really is no longer a need to project what this fund will look like in 16-17, because it will just be used to pay out the claims that are incurred but not paid.
So what you're going to have, if I understand correctly, point of clarification,
Yeah,
you're going into the state's healthcare plan for the Board of Education side employees. So what's going to have to be maintained within the town's internal service fund is really the costs for runoff related to the existing policy and claims that have not been paid out on a go-forward basis, correct?
yes.
Okay. And the schedule that you're showing us now was originally, we were projecting at the start of the budget year to have about $138,000 left in. That was the do no harm as of June 30th. And now it appears that through December, your experience is improved enough so that it looks like it's going to have almost $750,000 left. Is that correct?
That's correct. $750,000 above and beyond the runout.
The runout, the projected claim.
Projected claims, right.
Of course, as we can tell, this can vary substantially over the next few months.
Well, you saw it. It just varied $500,000 in 1 month.
Exactly.
Correct. And so you can see that in the October, the update, column 3, shows you an idea how this moves around. Column 3, we were looking at a deficit of $268,000. That was the projection based on the latest available information. And 1 month later, that had flipped around to a $276,000 positive. And 1 month after that, a $729,000 positive. So that's, we've had 2 good months in a row relative to the months 12 months earlier that came off. So that's how that's playing out right now.
So within the quarter, you improved by $1 million on the runoff.
Yes, we've gone from, yeah, that's just about right. Just about right. October, November, and December experience swung from a minus 268 to a plus 729.
Any questions right now on this as we walk down this schedule? Yes.
There's one clarification there. That's not a change in the runout
Exactly.
estimate,
Yes,
which is
right.
the way I think
No.
that might have been
Yeah.
understood by some.
Yeah,
Right.
no, that's because I used the wrong name,
Yeah.
but thank you. That's-
Right.
You're
So the
absolutely
runout does change a little bit, because as the claims go down, your projected runout goes down a little bit. So that is our estimate.
But Mr. Mayor's point is that's not the runout. That's just.
Yeah, the 729 is not the runout.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, I think you had your hand up.
So after the fourth quarter of next year, we will not be getting a presentation on medical retention fund from the Board of Education.
They will still be included in the medical retention fund for a period of time as the claims that are unsettled as of the end of this year need to be settled.
And how long?
The runout period.
And how long is that runout period?
Have
does
they
it take a
given you
quarter?
that number? Have they given you that length of time?
The vast majority, when we did this once before, when we
Yep.
switched from Anthem to Cigna, the vast majority of the claims are paid out in the first 6 months.
Right.
There can be some that trickle in. We also can, at some point, both parties want to end it because if they're still processing claims, they're still incurring costs, but they're not getting any payment from us. So I would say within the first 6 months, virtually all the claims will be paid out, and I would say the vast majority of them will also be paid out within the first 3 months after that. Typically, I don't know, Mr. Mayor has more experience in this than I do. Does that sound about right to you?
Correct.
Yeah. So
It won't be
we're still getting,
entirely paid out.
I'm sorry.
They won't be entirely paid out.
They'll be entirely paid out. There'll be some trickling in.
Right.
But we're going to use the fund as our, sort of a flow-through where we deposit employee contributions, we deposit COBRA payments, we deposit whatever, and then it just gets paid out to the state. But you're not going to, there's no fluctuation. It's going to be what it is. That's the great thing about this. We'll know what we're going to have. So that's why we truncated this and are only doing 15, 16. Is what do we project we'll have by the end of the year? Do we have enough money to pay the runout, as of June 30th? And that's what we're tracking right now.
And then are you committed to that new health care plan for a certain period of time?
You're committed to it for 3 years. You can exit after 1 year, there's a penalty. You can exit after 2 years, there's a smaller penalty. Penalty is calculated on the basis of if you have made excess claims, if your group has made excess claims over what you've paid in, whatever that delta is, if there is one. If there's no delta, there's no penalty. If there's a delta, you pay 5% of the difference. Okay. That's the penalty. In the second year, I think it's 3%? 3% of the difference. So if, for example, in April, a year from now, year from April, they give you the new rates, and they, for whatever reason, jack them up, and you go, oh my God, this was, this was a bait and switch. I mean, I don't think it's happening, but you decide to get out. That's how it works. So you're not bound for more than 1 year. After 3 years, there's no penalty for exiting and going back to whatever you had before.
Who would pay that penalty? Would that come out of the internal service fund? Would that come out of your budget? Or would that come out of the town budget?
It'd be our budget.
Okay.
We're still going to be budgeting for health insurance.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be part of our budget, the way I would see it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? So will we get one more report on this, one more look at this before the budget? Before we vote on the budget, we should, right? We should have
You
at
get
least
2 more months.
Right, at least January, hopefully February by voting night, right?
Not February, I don't think. Vote in, vote in March.
Right?
February, well, I might get,
I think
yeah, end of March, yeah, we'll get February, yeah.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Like the week of.
That's usually what happens.
Right.
It's like the week you're voting, in come the numbers.
Right.
Yeah, so you have 2 months more of experience
On this.
on this before you have to make a final decision on our budget or the town's budget, right?
Right.
And then the RTM would have another month, right?
That is correct.
1 more month of experience. I mean, each passing month, the volatility should dampen
Yes.
because there's only 6 months left now. By the time you vote, there's only 4. And yes, things can happen, but, you're getting closer to the right answer, the later it goes.
Mr. Walsh?
Do you expect to see a ramp up in claims towards the end of this policy period? Because our current policy might be better in certain regards, so therefore more people will try to take advantage of before June 30th. Because that happens with some companies sometimes when they switch, especially if they're going to a less generous program.
Yeah.
You see a huge glut of stuff coming in the last 2 months of service.
I wouldn't expect that to happen here. There's a bit of a quirk in the way the state plan treats out-of-network events and the deductibles for that, and then the aggregators. And actually, it would be in people's interest to wait in that sense. In fact, we're working with the teachers to put a memo out about that, as a matter of fact, that might be in your interest to wait. We can't really tell people exactly what to do, but we want to give them the information. The benefits are very similar, so I don't think there's going to be a big rush to, we got to get this procedure in. But that, there's always a risk of that. And there's always a risk of, no matter what we say this IBNR is going to be, we won't know what it actually is till we start paying it out. But there's not enough of a difference in the benefits it would be in anybody's interest to do it now. In fact, it might be in their interest to wait.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Todd. Mr. Tola?
You really can't have much of a difference because aren't you bound by collective bargaining agreements? You have to provide essentially the same benefits in this new plan that you're providing to your unionized employees right now. Isn't that true?
Yes, it had to be substantially equivalent, which we believe it was. So there shouldn't be any real need for anybody to do that. But you never know. Sometimes people are comfortable, like, I've got this procedure, I've got it approved, I want to get it in, I don't want to have to go through the approval process with a new insurance company. So somebody may be on something where they're already partway through the process, they don't want to wait, but I don't think we're going to get there's no reason to believe that there would be a rush to the operating room in June.
What's that? Great. Everybody? Thank you, Dr. Tidal.
All right, thank you. Appreciate
Appreciate
it. I appreciate you putting me first.
Good luck at your meeting tonight.
Okay.
All right. Item number 2, to receive and consider the comprehensive, comprehensive annual financial report, CAFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2015, is prepared by Cone Resnick. Good evening.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. I will note that during the course of your audit process, you did meet with our audit subcommittee on several occasions, correct? To plan your work and to review some of the results before finalization of the reports?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. Mrs. Leclerc, as chairperson of our audit subcommittee, do you have anything you'd like to say, by any chance?
No, everything was fairly smooth.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we had the opportunity. Any other members of the audit committee have anything? Seeing none, we'll turn it over to you, and thank you for coming here tonight.
So everyone have this document? I'm going to use this to kind of walk through the report versus actually the report document, but
Great.
we have it for any questions. All right, so on page 1 of the agenda, we're going to talk about the reports issued.
It's on. Your microphone's on, correct?
Yep. All right, I'll move it closer here. Look at the recommendations, the required communications, and talk about future considerations. There's quite a few this year. So the reports issued should have 4 documents: the CAFR, the federal single audit, the communication to those charged with governance, which we call the House 114 letter, and the recommendations. All right, so I'll start with the highlights. Budgetary fund balance increased by $3,992,000. As a result, the percentage of expenditures, the increase in fund balance went from 7.6 to 8.5% budgetary. Penfield Pavilion, there was an asset impairment from an accounting standpoint due to the storm, so that transaction was recorded in the financials. Part of its net of insurance proceeds, and then some of the business interruption proceeds were as revenue. So we'll look at pages on page 21, 24, and 47. We can look at those disclosures. GASB 68 was implemented this year. Last year we talked about 67, about what it was going to look like. This is the year it actually got recorded. So the net pension liability, related deferred inflows and outflows, are recorded for the first time on Exhibit A, which is the government-wide balance sheet. There's also a lot of new footnote disclosures related to GASB 68, and we can look at those on the pages noted there. A couple new RSI schedules, because as part of GASB 68 implementation, even though you have a 0 proportional share, this information about the state teachers plan that is required to be disclosed in the CAFR this year. And there's, just as a note, looking at the way things were budgeted, the medical benefits line was shown in the general government function as a separate versus a part of human resource to be consistent with retiree medical. So that's on Schedule 3, page 96. So that was a change in just presentation. Opinion on financial statements, pages 8 to 10. It's unqualified or unmodified opinion. Again, the section headings in the report talk about the different levels of responsibility that we take for the different sections of the report. Again, the management discussion analysis, pages 11 through 18. A good executive summary of what happened during the year. The first 2 bullets on page 11, we talk about that the town had implemented 68 and that the U.S. recorded actually a net gain on impairment of $700,000 related to Penfield. And then some of the highlights, again, talk about fund balance, which you mentioned that increased up to 8.53%. Internal service funds discussed on page 16. General fund budgetary highlights, Any major changes in the budget of the year are discussed on page 17. Significant capital asset activity and changes on page 17. And then the long-term debt activity changes on page 18. So again, that's a quick way to see what happened, notable things for the year, and give you a good overview of what's changed. So going to page 5 in the presentation, the unassigned fund balance now is at $24,260,000. Looking at, again, the guidelines, rating agency looking for strong fund balance to be 10 to 15%. And you've continued your trend to increase it, going from that 7.64 up to the 8.53 from last year to this year.
But you found that we're in full compliance with our current policy, correct? Because you have our current policy.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I do have your policy, correct.
Okay.
So we've essentially doubled the fund balance as a percentage of our budget over the last 6 years.
Yes, that's moving definitely in the right direction.
Yep.
Are you saying that we should get to 10 to 15%?
You know, again, their guidelines for strong is a big range, so that's what the rating agencies look at. Again, that's just one of the factors. I mean, you have a lot of other things going on here on the positive side that helps you keep the rating you have. So, so you may not need the same amount as some other type of community. But then again, you are on the shore and some things did happen before, so there's a balance there where having a little bit extra might help.
We had, as you know, we had set up a committee for this, and we'd gone through this and balanced a bunch of it, and I think it's time to probably form the committee again, to take another look at it, especially the part about locking it down to the 8% as a minimum, which was one of the things we had suggested that we were going to do. So maybe in the next month or two, we can reestablish the committee or something like that.
I
We can
propose-
get Joe in and do that.
Right after the next budget process.
Great.
We'll take another look at it. I did have occasion to talk, yeah, can we make sure that's in the meeting minutes? But I did have occasion to talk to a couple of chair people of other boards of finance from local communities recently, and they all were aiming towards, the 8 to 9% for the fund balance. They weren't aiming, no one wants to be the leader in this, because it means you're holding people's money for too long a period of time. So, and I'm sure you're seeing that with your clients, correct?
Right, the 8 to 12 is kind of the more normal range. I put the 10 to 15, that was something, but 8 to 12 is probably more what I see as the range that people are comfortable with.
Right.
Or then they start appropriating some of it or doing
Right.
some different things for
And
it.
don't forget, we did this while we were also dealing with concerns over the internal service fund over the last several years as well. Which
Right.
we're mitigating those concerns by some of the moves that are making on medical insurance, which
Right.
takes some of that risk element away from us. So between doing that and doing this, we're substantially lessening our risk to those outside influences.
Right, I would agree.
Mrs. Leclerc, did you have anything that you wanted? And I apologize, I missed your hand up.
Jim Walsh asked the questions.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead.
All right, page 6 is basically the same information in graph form. Page 7 shows total fund balance. Again, the other schedule was just unassigned. This is total fund balance. Again, showing the same trend that we looked at for the other numbers. And this is the budgetary fund balance, which happens to be the same amount as unassigned, but the trend in the budgetary fund balance. Page 8 reconciles is the roll forward of the unassigned fund balance from last year to this year. If we look at Exhibit D, the gap increase is the 3140 versus the budgetary increase was the 3092 that I talked about up front. The difference being the increase in encumbrances. So the unassigned is the 24,260.
Let's stop there. Does anybody have any questions on this area? We talked about forming the committee, we talked about the internal service fund, we talked about we've doubled the fund balance as a percent over the last 6 years. Does anybody have any other questions on this? All right. Thank you.
All right, so on page 10, the first three bullets are some of what we just talked about, and then looking at where the $3,092,000 came from. Revenues were in excess of budget, about $1.9 million, most of that being in the tax line, and there were spending savings of $692,000, again, $500 of that being part of your plan to increase the fund balance.
Okay.
All right. So page 11 is something I did that's a little bit new this year that I've wanted to do since GASB 34 came out. But if we look at Exhibit B in the audit, this is the format where it shows the functions and programs, and it's offset by revenue, and then the last column would represent the net cost of those services. So what I did, instead of doing it on the accrual basis, which really the numbers are kind of all the funds and all the activity, I did this similar statement just for the general fund on a budgetary basis. So it starts with your expenses, and that'll agree right to Exhibit F. And then we map the different charges for services, the operating grants, and then the other financing sources to get the net tax cost of services. So what the schedule is showing you is basically when you're raising taxes of $260 million, this is what the taxes are paying for, the net cost of each of those functions. So it's just a different perspective as far as you usually build the budget a little bit differently, and you back into what the tax is, but this is kind of more mapping it to each of the different types of services and functions and programs that the town is providing. So just a different way to look at the data.
Does anybody have a question on this? I like this schedule. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
So you see the bottom comes out to that 3092 that we talked about a couple times. So, all right. So the financial statements start, the internal service funds are page 28 to 30. So there was operating loss of $866,000. That was basically due to some changes in estimates related to some prior workers' comp claims. Again, still your net position deficit is less than the long-term portion of liability by a considerable amount. So I think that even though it's a deficit number, the liability for workers' comp and for legal are longer-term liabilities versus medical is about a 6-week liability at this point. So the fact that you have enough cash to pay your current liabilities, I think the fund's in good shape, even though the bottom line shows a deficit.
Okay. Questions on this? This is not really new information, but it's good to review it.
All right, pension funds. So a lot of different things going on with pension this year due to the implementation and just due to the the change in the performance of the funds. So the detailed financial statements are on page 67, 66, and 67, which is in the footnotes. So this shows the plan separately. So change in net position for the town was $840,000, and change in fair value was $2.8 million. For police and fire, it was basically a break even of a decrease of $39,000, and a change in fair value was $2.6 million. So prior year, just for perspective, the increase in that position was $22 million, and the change in fair value was about the same number. And police and fire was $19.2 million, and change in fair value was the $21.67. So obviously the market had a huge impact on the operations. So just in general, the revenue side, town expenses increased by about $500,000 in that plan, and police and fire increased about $300,000. And there's several new disclosures required by 68 that talks about the pension liability and how that changes. So the investment rate of return, so this is something now that's in RSI on pages 60 to 65. So the rate of return was 2.59 versus the 16% last year, and for police, 2.62 versus, again, the 16.05%. So last year, we started out with a small pension asset, and due to the, the change in the market, they're now showing liability. So page 60. So it's the net pension liability, which is a small amount relatively of $15.4 million for the town, and for police, $14.8 million. So the funding ratio is about 92% for both of those. So still in good shape as far as the funding of those.
Can I ask a question relative to our plans? So, is that okay? I didn't miss anybody. Okay. I want to turn to page 68, since we're on this section. And I want to go specifically to our defined contribution plan. Right? This was a new plan that's been established over the last few years. Right? I'll have some questions later on the plan for Mr. Mayor, but the first question is, at a certain point, and I'm asking what point it might be, do we need to have that plan audited independently? Or are we required as a governmental entity? Because I know corporations have their defined contribution plans audited, right?
Right, 401ks and those type of things.
Right, and there's certain, and I don't know for the government what those requirements are for audits of those plans.
Yeah, there aren't any audit requirements. There's not even any reporting requirements other than to say you have a plan and this is how much money you put in, the town put in, and this is how much employees put in.
Right.
So there isn't any audit requirement, because
But I am right in saying corporations will have separate audits of their 401k plans.
yes, that's
And what you're saying is that same requirement does not exist for defined contribution plans on the governmental side.
right, because what's driving it in the private sector is ERISA rules, and governments are not subject to ERISA.
So there's no ERISA rules, so if we never wanted to have those plans audited and just let them roll, that we could do that. And all you guys need to do is make sure that we disclose the fact that we have those plans in these financial statements.
Correct. I mean, because conceptually, the way they're kind of set up is once the money goes in, it's really between the employee and who's holding the investments. The town is really out of it, because your commitment was to put in X%, and you did. So yeah, beyond that.
No, it's very similar to a corporation, but in the corporation, because they have the ERISA rules and everything else, they have to follow those other requirements.
Right, that's correct. So over 100, usually you have to have an audit. Under 100, you can have a short form.
Thank you for that. Okay. So are there any questions on that right now? Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Back to on page 13, on the expense side,
Okay.
do our expenses generally go up that much year over year?
Page 13, in the audit report, or?
No,
Am I-
expenses,
The pension fund expenses, right?
right,
That's what you're referring to.
the pension fund expenses,
Oh, okay.
not your expenses. I would think they would go down year over year.
That's always the request I get, yes. I probably haven't looked at that analytically other than those 2 years. I mean, generally you have more retirees, so I'm not sure if I looked at the population, if there's more retirees, it might be higher as far as when people retire and how many people are no longer receiving.
So do we have information on that over the past 5 years?
Yeah, it would be in in audits, we'd be able to build, what that's been trending at as far as that. I'm sure that the actuaries under the new rules project some of that going out, so I don't know if they have it going back, but under the new rules of the discount rate, they gotta make sure you won't run out of money, so they'll project future expenses, so
So they project, but I'm wondering
what it actually was. Yeah, there's no schedule anywhere that's in the audit or in the tables that tracks pension, but the information would be available. Wouldn't be too hard to pull together a 5-year trend for each plan.
Can we do that?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Excuse me a second, the actuaries are here, excuse me, present I think the first meeting, which would be March 1st. So they'll be here then.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, let's go ahead.
So I'm just going to point out, just on page 86 and 87, just because this is one of the most confusing things, even to me and my staff, is the assumptions that are reported on 86 and 87. These assumptions are the assumptions that are used to calculate your required contribution or actuarially determined contribution. They may not be the same assumptions that are used to calculate the net pension liability, because they don't have to be the same thing. So if you look at this page and you go into the notes, there may be different assumptions used. So I'm just pointing out that these assumptions relate to these actuarially determined contribution pages. So it's the assumptions the actuary used to do these calculations to say that your actually determined contribution for 2015 should be $5 million. Again, different assumptions can be used to calculate the net pension liability, and that's disclosed in the notes. So I guess I'm putting that out there up front, because it is very confusing if you go back and look at it. And it's new to everybody, so I get that question a lot. And then,
So we're using, or we could use, a different basis for calculating the annual contribution versus what the net liability is.
you could use, I mean, the one thing, like I've said before, that GASB did right is to measure the liability. Everybody has to use entry age normal. Everybody has to measure against fair value. So they kind of standardize those couple things as far as the calculations, so that the liability is calculated the same way in the financials. The contribution you can calculate any way you want, because now the rule used to be we book the liability against the contribution. How much did the actuary say? How much did you actually do? Now that we are recording the liability, standards in a sense don't care how much you contribute, because it's just going to affect the liability.
It's a reporting thing as opposed to an adequacy thing.
Right. So that was the major focus change on that. So you can use any method you want to calculate the contribution, because it doesn't matter except for the impact on the liability, which then, if you're not contributing what you're supposed to, obviously is going to have a negative impact. So that was the focus change from that 68 had from 25 or 27.
Mr. Mayor, we haven't developed a policy yet for the contribution versus the liability, what we're trying to do there, or any of that, or what the relationship we want to see, have we?
I think we based, our contribution is our liability.
Our contribution is our liability.
And we use the same methodology.
On both?
Pretty sure. I wouldn't.
Do we?
I would have to compare it. I think you definitely use the same valuation method, entry age, because a lot of towns are still using the projected unit credit for contribution, and not for NPL is required. But you, at least, that's the major thing that has to be the same, and you are using the same.
So at that point, how about the other ones? Mr. Vahey's shaking his head back there, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I would have to map them, but
I'd like to know if that's just our policy, right? I mean, if we're establishing that, this is a new world order, if we're establishing that as the policy, then that should be the policy, right?
it makes the most sense. I don't know why you really would want them to be different, other than obviously different assumptions for contribution impacts your budget, so sometimes.
Well, it would allow you to play a game by adjusting the contribution level as compared to the liability level.
Right.
And just recording the difference as a liability in your balance sheet and playing games with your budget.
Right. It'll impact your liability, because it will go up because
Right.
You're not funding it as fast, but But yeah, it makes the most sense to line them up, so I think that's
Okay.
what you're doing here. Okay. So pension. So the RSI, we started building last year. They're supposed to be 10-year tables. Again, they started on page 80 and they go to all the way to 93. So we have the 2 years trending. Again, you'll be able to see the schedule of returns over 10 years. We just have the 2. So on an average basis, you're hitting, over a 2-year average, you're hitting more than your 7.5% return. So at the bottom of 16 was what we just talked about. That was the change in focus for how much did you contribute versus how much assets do you have to pay towards the liability.
And I think Mr. Walsh has a question.
So on page 17, do you have a page like that for the pension where it talks about where we are with how funded we are? I thought you usually had that in your presentation.
How the funding as a percentage,
Yes.
it's a different, and it's only on what's the RSI, right? So if we go back to where was I, on page 80. Well, 80 was the financials. So funded on 82 shows you you're 92% funded for the employees plan as compared to 101% last year. It's the fourth line down. And then for the police on page 83, police and fire 92.404% versus the 97 last year. So again, that'll build out to be 10 years. But since that pension liability is a new calculation, we only have 2 years of data right now, but that eventually would be a 10-year trend look.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
So OPEB funds, again, the detailed statements are on page 77 and 78. So the OPEB liability, again, which is the old rule, is just measuring the liability changes based upon how much you contributed versus what you were supposed to contribute. So the liability for the town went down 24,000. Police and fire was an increase of 38,000, and the Board of Ed was an increase of 610,000. So as far as how much did you contribute, as far as what you were required to contribute, town was 103. Pretty similar to last year. Police and fire was 102, again, same as last year. And Board of Ed was up to almost 64%, up from 56% in the prior year. So looking at the funded ratio of OPEB, the town plan's at 19%, the police and fire is at 15.2%, and the Board of Ed is not a funded plan, so that's still at 0%. So all those schedules and everything we talked about for pension and all the RSI and moving the liability into the balance sheet and all that type of things are going to happen for OPEB also in fiscal year 18. So this presentation will go away and it'll change to be the same as what pension is. We'll do the preview in 2017 and then we'll actually book the liability in 18.
And Mr. Walsh.
Why was there such a drastic change with the Board of Education?
Yeah, that would be, I'm not sure what the reason is. That would be probably a question to ask the actuary since it's based upon their calculations. So I don't think I got credit for more, because the Board of Ed is basically the pay-as-you-go amount is what you're getting credit for as your contribution. So if that number increased, then the percentage would increase.
All right, Bob, can we get a presentation with when the actuaries are down here and why that number changed so drastically?
Like I said, they'll be here March 1st.
Yeah, but could you tell them to be prepared to address this page in our CAFR,
Yes,
page 17?
got it.
Okay, I just want to be prepared, I don't want to be unprepared.
Yeah.
And that, this way you can
I
send
got
them the
it.
CAFR page and let them be prepared. Thanks.
Let me ask you another question. On the funded ratio for the OPEB for the town and the police and fire, okay, Board of Ed is unfunded, it's pay-as-you-go. Got it. Town, police, and fire is, we made a conscious effort to set up those plans a few years ago. Now, obviously, when we look on the pension side, we're doing much better as a percentage. We're in the 90-plus percentile, and we're routinely in that percentile and try to keep it here. Here, we're in the 19 and 15.2 percentile. Where does that stand as compared to other towns and municipalities?
This is probably a little bit higher than average. I have to go back and look, because you definitely were early in getting the trust funds set up. There's still some towns that have chosen not to set up trust funds, so we're still at 0 today. So you're probably a little bit ahead of the curve as far as the funding, and because now you're up to 100% again, which not necessarily everybody's up to 100% of the ARC either.
Well, we're 100% funding it per year, but we're also putting money away to address the further long-term liability to the tune of 19% and 15.2%. And what you're saying is we're better off than many other towns and municipalities right now?
Yes.
Which, I mean, is the equivalent of being, for lack of a better way to put it, the world's tallest midget, but right? I mean, isn't that the...
Right, only because you've only been funding these,
Yes.
these plans for, 5 or 6 years, however many, 7 or 8 years, and most of these plans, the goal is to be fully funded over 30 years, so.
30 years, right.
So you're at, 20% already.
Right.
You're on a good pace.
So we're heading in the right direction.
Right, but it's expected that it would take a long time to kind of get you up to that 90% range.
Good.
Based upon the amortization of the liability.
Okay. Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure we were in the right direction.
And maybe this is a question for the actuaries as well. Based on this, the ARC or whatever the new terminology they use is that supposed to be get up to approximately the 100 if we fund it at like 20 years, or how long a period of time is that we should get there if we continue to fund it at the levels required? I presume there's some.
There's definitely
Actually,
a plan.
I mean,
It depends on your
investment returns, how much drawn off of it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
all the variables, yeah.
All the variables,
But the goal is, I think we do 5-year smoothing on the gains and losses, I believe, and I think it's a 20-year on the funded portion. But I'm not certain on that, but
Yeah.
Tim will know that right off the top of his head.
I mean, it just would be, I think, helpful for this board to know we're 15 more years out, just to give us a realistic assessment of, unless gains are high, or it could be longer if they're not, or if the utilization is higher than we thought it was going to be.
If you look at the middle column there, you see the town's required contribution was, the last 2 years, the contribution has been 2% and 3% greater than the required contribution. And that's because we fully fund the contribution liability requirement, and then we pay the claims out of that, and the excess we put into the plan.
Right. Which was a policy we put in place a number of years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a policy, but it's what we do, yeah.
I mean, it's what we've asked.
It's what we
to be
do,
done.
yeah.
So if you look at page 75, that'll give you some of the answers, but I would definitely ask the actuary. So looking at the assumptions, looking at the remaining amortization period, we have the town at 15.5 years and police and fire at 25 years. So if everything went according to plan, in theory, that's how long it would take to get fully funded. Again, hitting all your assumptions right on
Yes.
over
Yeah,
average. So.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on? All right. So page 18 is updated schedule of the Madoff recoveries and related expenses. So for 2015, recovery amount was $355,000, related expenses of $71, so a net of additional $284. So cumulatively, total net recoveries of the 13.3 million.
Just a question on the Madoff recoveries, not getting into the specifics, are we to be expecting that this is going to continue to get more recoveries as time goes by, or are you going to at least let us know at a certain point that we're not going to be receiving any more recoveries?
We are not going to be receiving any more recoveries.
Okay, so this, I guess, will be the last report on this? Okay.
And I have one last question on this, just because I want to, it's been a while now. The 40 million, remind me, that was the gross amount, that wasn't the
Initial investment,
initial
which
investment.
was around 15 million.
Right, so we've essentially recovered 15 out of the 13 out of the initial investment.
Correct.
And the rest was not there to begin with.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the federal and state single audits, which are the smaller bound reports. On pages 1 and 2 of the single audit reports are the federal monies spent by the town for the fiscal year. We have an unmodified or a clean opinion on compliance and with no findings or question costs. And we've tested a new FEMA grant, which is the Hazard Mitigation Program, as one of our major programs this year. The state single audit, the list of all the state money spent is on pages 10 and 11. Again, an unmodified or clean opinion with no findings or question costs. And we tested 5 major programs this year, one of which was the microgrid project. You all should have received the SAS 114 letter, which is a required communication that we have with governance. And that letter highlights the management's estimates, which include the net pension liability, workers' comp liability, and the incurred but not reported. Also discloses and talks about the changes in accounting policies, which was the implementation of GASB 68 this year. Management has provided us representations, and we have corrected and uncorrected misstatements, and you should have received all of the past adjustments or the uncorrected misstatements attached to the SAS 114 package. Do you have any questions on
I don't know.
those reports
Does anybody?
or letter?
Anybody have any questions right now? I don't, it was a while, I don't recall. You would have gotten it as the chairman.
I got it.
Can you speak into the mic?
I don't think we received it.
Received.
The 114 and the past adjustments.
Okay. Did you have that, Mr. Mayor?
I'm trying to recall, I know we've certainly gone over it, but I don't remember whether I received it officially or not. It seems like I should have.
Should have been in the box, but
Can we check and
Yeah.
just make sure that was,
Yeah, and not distributed, maybe.
I don't recall,
Yeah,
but check
No, I'm
and
not-
make sure what
yeah.
it was.
I'll look in the box in the morning.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, now we'll go on to the management letter recommendations. There were 3 comments. One was from 2014. One was corrected, which was the investment classifications, which was the investment broker and holder reconciled the investment information for the financial statement disclosures and footnotes. 2 of the comments are repeat comments. The Public Works record keeping, which is the timesheets reconciled to the daily logs, just having better record keeping in terms of reconciling those 2 together. And the 3rd comment, which is a repeat comment, is relates to grant management. And again, noting that all departments should provide the finance department with grant paperwork so that they can ensure that receivables and payables are properly recorded, and grant drawdown requests are timely filed. So where there's expenditures that are grant related, that are reimbursement grants, that the drawdowns are being submitted timely so that the funds can get to the town or board timely.
This grants management recommendation has been here for how many years? The last
Two
three?
or three?
I think it's three.
Three,
Three.
definitely the last two.
And are we doing anything about it? Because this board approved a position in the finance department to do this. And it keeps,
Mr. Mayor, do you want to comment?
it keeps popping up, and I know the first selectman put in his budget last year. The Board of Selectmen approved it last year. The Board of Finance approved this position last year because this position keeps popping up as a recommendation. And then somehow between there and the RTM, it was decided that that wasn't going to be funded and that there was going to be some amount of money allocated. So I thought that some of that money would be used to do this, but it apparently was not. So what's the plan on how we're going to get rid of this recommendation once and for all?
You know, what we've done this year with respect to grants is put together initially internally, and then shared our work with Cohen Resnick, and then they embellished it, improved it. So we have right now is a draft grant policy. The next steps are to finalize that document, and then from there determine what kind of resource estimates required to accomplish what we end up with in that document, and then apply that resource as we have it.
I'm not sure what you just said.
I said we have a draft policy. The policy has certain steps that would be required for individuals to do. We have to finalize that draft, make sure it's exactly what we want, and then we have to determine how much work it would take to fulfill executing the steps of that we define as the policy.
Okay, so last year, there was rather vigorous discussion over this position, as I recall. It got through the Board of Selectmen. Let me finish for a second. So as much that I like to hear myself talk, as I want to make sure I have the right understanding. The position, we asked for a job description, actually. And we got a job description presented to us. And on the basis of the job description, we approved that position, as I recall, right, to move forward. And part of that position was to do this, the grant work, right, to address this issue.
Correct.
Okay. So then it went from our desk and it went to the RTM, right? And there were some adjustments made between here and the RTM that I think you were part of, right? In other words, the funding wasn't completely pulled out.
Correct. I think we have $62,000 or $3,000 in the budget.
Right. So how much of that money has been spent? And if it hasn't been spent here, where's it been spent?
Almost none of the money has been spent because we haven't had the time to spend the money. I think maybe it was allocated maybe $8,000 or something like that.
So, well, wait a minute. We allocated 60. There's 60,000.
I mean, I think I have 8,000
that you've spent.
that I've spent and will spend, that I know I'm spending before the end of the year.
So the position.
To 12. Maybe.
So this hasn't been addressed between last year.
No, it has been. We have developed a detailed draft which details the responsibilities of all the departments, details the responsibilities of the finance department, and that detailed draft was probably completed, I don't know, a month or so maybe ago, and it's been sitting on my desk.
Right. So I'm just trying to get it. So we're over half the year in, and the policy and the work for this is still in draft form.
Correct.
So if they were to come in and audit this year, this would be repeated yet again. even though we have a draft policy, it might be,
Well, if they were to audit today, yes. If it's completed by the end of the year, then it won't be repeated again.
so will this be completed by the end of the year?
Hopefully, yes. That's the plan.
Hopefully, yes. So is that, are we going to see this next year in this audit?
I hope not.
Do you need resources to be able to do this stuff? Because that's
Well,
the
every-
question. You can have a policy all you want, but if you don't have the, you know, you always
That's
tell
what
us
I
you don't
said,
have the
we got-
resources.
It's,
Yeah, but that's what we asked last year, why we gave the money.
you know, we asked for a person,
Right.
you know, and we identified several functions that that person would fulfill. The RTM asked if we would give it a go to see if we could execute what we needed to execute with a dollar allotment that we could utilize for hiring part-time people, hiring interns, utilizing the services of people like Cohen Resnick, et cetera. But based upon the activities in the department and then the responsibilities of the department, we have made limited headway on those tasks.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
I think something needs to be done in this regard. I will tell you that personally, as my own member here, some of us at this table, many of us, went on a limb and supported this position. And after it left us, we got a presentation, the Board of Selectmen, the first selectman we all get on board with this position. And then there's some negotiation behind the scenes with the RTM, and poof, this position goes away without any justification of it to us, before, after, during, or whatever. And it's hard to get a position into the town, just because everyone wants to limit these budgets, and I thought we'd all worked hard to get it, and I just think that it should be there, but it was just a little disappointing, I think, to see that I think it should have gone to the RTM as an up or down vote and let them vote for it. Because now we're sitting here and some deal was cut with them. And $68,000 was there and we still haven't spent 60 of it. Whereas if we had had the position, somebody would be doing this work and we probably wouldn't have this recommendation. And I don't know where the first selectman's going with his budget, whether we're going to try to get it back in or not, but it's going to be hard to justify putting $68,000 back in this budget this year, if that's the way it comes to us, with only 8 spent.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt, who wants a question on this topic.
Just for clarification more than anything, Mr. Becker and I have been looking over the budget book. There was a request in last year's budget called Support Help New Projects, $62,008, which ultimately did not get funded. We did, though, approve $18,151 for, in my notes, a staff accountant. Now, whether that was, I thought that was part of this same effort. The 62,008 was, again, that was not funded. It was approved through our process and then cut later on.
That's what I was questioning, so, because Mr. Mayor, how, you think you have the 60 there? Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
That's not what the budget book says.
Yeah, there's two, if I may, it gets a little bit confusing. There's a head count number, and then there's a no head count, but a funded dollar amount. There's two pools.
Right.
But if you go back, part of the 17, which then went to 18 from the prior budget, was originally supposed to address this, right? And then we get the 62 last year,
Right, yeah.
and
I think the 62 is in fees and professional services.
Well, there's
You're saying you moved the 62 to fees and professional
think that's where it is.
services as
According to the
opposed
book,
to
It's actually under
a body?
personnel.
No. When it left
Right.
us, it was under personnel.
No, this is the
in the
final.
book.
That's
Oh.
the final,
That's why 60
okay.
number-
Oh, I'm sorry,
It says
okay.
it,
It's
yeah.
actually
I'm
under.
confused what they're
It's under
saying there.
personnel, and it says number of personnel, 0, but it does say $62,000. So as it would appear, as Mr. Becker, I think accurately states it, there's a pool of money with no person associated with it.
Well, that's what he said.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
That's exactly what he
Okay.
said.
that's what he said.
So
That's
to go-
not here.
No, but that's exactly what he said.
And
No,
then there's also-
Originally, when Mr. Mayor came before us last year, you were asking us to fund a position. We asked you for a job description, yada, 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 right?
Correct,
It left this table approved as a position.
correct.
Between here and the RTM, the position itself got eliminated, so we weren't adding to staff,
Correct.
but dollars were given to say, don't add a staff, but address the issues that the staff would have to do, correct? By
Correct.
using part-time labor, professional services, things like that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
how much did that move save? I mean, essentially.
Would it say
healthcare
this,
and
the
employment-
salary of, plus benefits?
Well, wouldn't it save the salary if?
Well, no, the salary's gonna be more than $62,000.
Right.
What it did was it didn't add to headcount.
Well, you had originally spec'd the position, I mean, your original request, it shows from the department at 62. I mean, I think there was some discussion that to get what we really wanted, it may have ended up actually being a little more than 62. But the big driving there was you avoid the health care and the 401 contribution by using part-time sort of miscellaneous hires.
By not having a staff, we do not incur the approximately $23,000 healthcare costs. We do not incur the normal costs for the pension and the normal costs for the OPEB, and Social Security and all the other benefits that go with it.
Well, this would have been a non-pension hire though, right?
Well, 401K is a pension, theoretically.
Well-
401A, excuse me.
But I mean, less than, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there would be a hard cost to.
Right.
Okay.
It actually worked out better because we saved another 54,000 because we just didn't do it.
Of course, then we end up, yeah, I mean,
I'll do my best to spend.
You said you weren't going to spend any by the rest of the year.
No, I said what I know I'm going to spend, what I have targeted work started on. We still have 5 months to
So
go.
we should see $62,008 in the black for this budget this year.
once he starts.
He said he's going to spend some.
What are we planning on spending?
I'm spending,
And who's gonna spend it? Some shared resource?
What are we expecting to spend money on?
It's hard to spend if you don't have someone to spend it.
Let's let it go.
it's a little confusing for me. We have, the library work is one of the items, cash flow is the second item, grant is the third item. There's 3 other items, but I don't remember them off the top of my head.
And who's doing the work?
The grant, well, the work is accomplished by the town's current staff, plus, right now, we have not used any part-time work for any of the work, but we've used Corner Resnick and intend to use Corner Resnick.
We intend to use Kern and Resnick to do the rest of the work? That's how
Some
the
of the
other
work. We do it.
54,000 is going to be spent?
I'm not sure what your question is exactly.
I'm wondering how we're going to spend the rest of the $54,000.
I don't know if I'm going to spend the rest of $54,000, and we're going to do as much of the work as we can get accomplished in the time that we have. There's an extreme amount of resource required from the finance department this last year. FEMA continues, and the Penfield Budget Committee continues to take a lot of time. We're currently, as you know, operating without an HR director, without an IT director, without a purchasing director, and the finance department is very active in all 3 of those roles. But in the HR role, we are doing our best to hire all 3 of those people. So it's a matter of time and effort. We're not going to spend as much of that money as we possibly can, but we're going to spend as much of that money as to accomplish what we have time to accomplish.
And I understand that, and I'm not saying that you don't need the person, and actually, I think that with all the work that you're talking about having needed to be done, it would have been good to have another hand on board in your department to help assist you with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah, I appreciate your support. I appreciate the Board of Selectmen's support. I appreciate this body's support for that position. It's unfortunate, it just didn't get carried all the way through. And so we are dealing with, and it is saving money. And when we get the policies, the procedures, and everything kind of identified, we'll have a better idea as well as to what type of person, what skill set we need.
All right, I just want to follow up. If you can, as we approach our budget season, since we're going to be looking at your budget again, provide us with a scope of services for any of this stuff with Cohen and Resnick and what their hourly rates are for this stuff and whatever, because sometimes it just seems hard to believe that it would be easier, even though we're not paying benefits, that the resources of Cohen and Resnick, as great as they are, can be done for a fee that's less than we can get an in-house person to do some of the more menial things that we need to be done. So to the extent that any of this stuff with the spending of this money, we can get either a letter of engagement, what the scope of services are, how the billing's done, it would be helpful to determine whether, personally, I want to go down this road, because I didn't have the ability to do this last year, about whether I wanted to have the finance department have a fees and service number for $62,000.
Yeah, for example, one of the things that we want to do is convert the accounts payable department to electronic transfer.
To what?
Electronic transfer.
Electronic payments.
So, and that requires inputting, data into the system for every vendor and setting up. So we would probably hire a part-time person to do a lot of that data entry work. We would also want to make sure that we incorporate full policies and procedures. So we'd probably engage Cohen and Resnick to make sure that we do the work and set it up properly and with proper internal controls. And we'll also, obviously, manage the project in-house. So it'd be three resources utilized to complete that project. As an example of a project.
I've got a couple thoughts on that I do want to say, but I'm going to wait because Mr. Mattola's been patient. Do you have?
All I was going to say is your answer a couple minutes ago to some of these questions appears to me to be the justification for why you needed this position a year ago. You simply don't have the time to do what you need to do, it sounds like. Is that a fair statement? And you're trying, I understand that, but let me ask you a quick question too, and then we can move on. So once this study is completed, what you're doing, the policy, the draft policy, are you going to anticipate that once that's done and formulated, that you're still going to need that position filled, or you just don't know?
The question at this point is, we need extra resources. There's no question. The question about that extra resource is what level of resource, what skill set of resource, what dollar value of resource.
All right.
That's great. Here's a couple things, all right? Number one, I don't believe this didn't get done because you don't have that extra person in here, because that extra person in here who would be a new employee wouldn't be the one setting the policy, as you pointed out. It would be yourself. This didn't get done because of your bandwidth, because you don't have an HR director, you don't have an IT director, and you're doing all the other things along with Ms. Bossy and everything else. But let's not kid ourselves and say that if we brought this person on, they'd be setting policy for the town.
I'm not saying that.
I know, I'm just saying that they wouldn't be, okay? That's not saying you don't need the help. The other thing is, I think we need to prioritize. Well, I myself am doing the same thing with accounts payable in my company right now. Like, the first thing I prioritized was actually getting the internal controls solved. This has been a control point for a number of years. So before we go to electronic AP, really to get the grants and the cash management, making sure we're getting all the dollars in the door, to me, is very important. And one of the main reasons last year why I agreed to fund this position, because I thought it was needed for those reasons, and I think that's a plausible case, and we're probably leaving money on the table. So that concerns me, because I think that should be a priority.
I don't think I implied that AP was a higher priority.
I'm not accusing you of
Right,
that at all.
okay.
I'm just saying if it were me, this would be a
Get
bigger
it done.
priority than the AP thing, right?
Right.
Only because I think we could be
Right.
leaving money on the table here. And by the way, I think that's what you're telling us. It's because there's not a good coordination. You can't be sure that that's not the case, correct? Now, as I just complimented you guys for this, I'm going to say the one really uncomfortable part I have is being a former auditor, is hiring Conan Resnick to do some of these things. Because I just don't want your independence impaired in any way. And for you guys to be hired to come in and set up internal control systems and the like, and then have to go and rely on those internal control systems months later when you issue an opinion, I have a problem with that. And I'm not saying you wouldn't do a good job on either side of it. I'm just saying that that blurs the lines for me over our relationship with Conan Resnick. And I'm just not comfortable with that, because I want them completely independent on all matters related to that.
We'll take careful account of what you're saying, yes, sir.
So that's the way I'd say it. But I think it comes down to the point that on our 2004 recommendations, we have two items that are back before us again, the Public Works record keeping and then the grants and cash management. I think both these items have been here for several years, right? And are these our biggest risk points?
Those are.
Those are.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this item? Because we haven't even gotten the 2015 recommendation yet. All right, go right ahead.
Actually, that's it.
That's
There's
it.
no new recommendation.
Beautiful.
Same.
Okay, so you get an A+ if you get this solved. Great. Okay, future considerations, please go right ahead.
All right, this year, we talked about, we implemented 68. Next year, fair value measurement and application, new definition of investments, some new categorization of how fair value is determined. So this is going to be very similar to the private sector as far as the whole category 1, 2, and 3 of how easily, readily available the market value is for certain investments. So that will be categorized as a footnote in next year's financials. Several other statements relate to updating some of the pension information. Hierarchy gap is more for the auditors. Investment pools is effective in 17. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see GASB is a little bit too busy. If there's, usually I have 2 or 3 on this list. The important ones we talked about was GASB 74 and 75. Those are the big ones because they relate to the OPEB and how that accounting is going to change to be very similar to pensions. And the new thing that number 77 is tax abatements. So if you have official tax abatement things, now you're going to have to disclose those in your financials. So that's a new disclosure that will happen for 2017. So that's all we have. Do you have
Any further questions?
Good presentation.
Yeah.
Tom, we're wrapping it up.
Thank you very much.
all right? Yep, thanks.
Thank you for everything. Appreciate it again. Thanks for coming out tonight. Mr. Mayor, thank you and your team for all the hard work. Mrs. Fossey, going through an audit, it's not an easy exercise, and you guys did quite well in the fact that you got so few internal control points and that you knew of them. You're to be congratulated. So thank you for that. All right, next item on the agenda is the town's OPEB and pension reports review for the quarter. Mr. Vahey, good evening. Thank you for being here. All right. Trying to figure out which report we have it before us first, and I think it's...
Looks like OPEB.
That's what I thought too, that's what I was hoping. Go right ahead.
Still $25 million, which is roughly where it was last month.
Yep.
December was a down month, as was January, so
we had a loss in investment value, which you'll see in both funds, so,
And we're still, what, again, remind us what that number is to get a bit better investment mix? What was the number? 25 million has to be what number, remember? To diversify more?
oh, and so, yeah, well, it varies by manager, but, you're probably gonna need at least a $10 million mandate in an individual asset class, so.
Right.
But like I said, our fixed income is with our existing manager because they made an exception.
Okay. Do we have any questions on the OPEB numbers right now? Anything at all? Seeing none, let's go over to pension.
Oh, and earlier, when you were asking about this, where we stood with respect to other towns and OPEB,
Yeah.
Callan, our advisor, also, they see lots of funds in Connecticut, and we're on the upper end of the spectrum as far as funding, for what it's worth.
No, that's what I would have thought. I just want to make sure we were keeping pace there, so thank you for following up with that.
And it should be like a 10 or 15-year ramp to get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
But that's also based on the actuarial assumptions that are baked in, which I guess we're going to review here shortly. I think they might be a little aggressive in their thoughts about where costs are going to be, but we'll see.
Don't they stop the rising cost after 5 years or something?
It was something, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I did not.
I remember the same thing. Yeah, we've talked about that previously. Thank you. Do we have questions for Mr. Vahey on the pension? So I believe we're at the asset distribution.
Well, we're on the main fund, which has drifted down with the poor results of the last quarter of the year. It's currently sit at about 342 million. We also, I think we had to take 2 million out to fund benefits, so that's also part of we had down investments and a withdrawal. Asset class, it was pretty brutal across the board. I will say that, we finished a year, asset classes and managers stood out. We had, real estate did really well, thankfully. Private equity did decently as well. The hedge funds were a mixed bag. I mean, they were generally up, and that is a new thing on here as well. It's not reflected on this sheet, but the one change we're going under, if you go to the second, I guess it's actually the third page, which has hedge funds listed.
Yep.
And you'll see we have 3 funds, Canadas, Wellington, and DGAM. DGAM is, they're shutting their doors, and we will be getting our 16 million back from them hopefully over the next year. They had a very large investor, state of Maryland, had about half of their fund was with the state of Maryland. State of Maryland's going away from hedge funds in general, so we had decided that if there were any other, which the fund is still viable at that point, but we were worried that other folks are going to leave, and at that point, managers have to figure out what they're going to sell and how they're going to manage that drawdown. And so we put a contingent call in that we would also withdraw our monies if any other investors pulled out before the next, they call it the gate period, which was, I want to believe it was in January. We had a certain date, but we had to get a request in. And 2 other small pension funds in Canada did pull their investments, so we went along with them, and they decided that was it, and they're just going to liquidate the fund. So we've not decided what we were going to do, and we have some time to discuss that at the upcoming meeting, since we're not going to get our money back immediately. So, but otherwise, commodities was brutal. Equities were down. Fixed income's a mixed bag. I think that's about it, and our allocations are roughly where they're supposed to be on everything.
Are there any, other than everything being down right now, which you don't control, is there any areas of big concern for you in the group right now? You and the committee?
No, we're going to do we've been having managers in our regular schedule, so we're basically reviewing the folks we already have monies with. As far as other stuff on the agenda, we'll have the actuaries come in, so that's, we may be up for our discussion on, I think we might be due for an experience study, which happens every 4 to 5 years.
We are. We'll be doing
Excellent.
it this next year.
That's always a fun conversation, because that's when we talk about target rates. And we have some ideas of about where we might want to go with that. And also, we may be having some discussion on a concept called ESG investing, which is environmental, social, and governance. It's sort of a policy more so than just actually changing our investments. And it's just putting in awareness, just like the state of Connecticut has. Like they have a policy as well. Things that might be impacted are is your investment policy aligned with the greater good of the environment, good governance practices, and then social. And one big one that's close to home, Sandy Hook and gun manufacturers in the state of Connecticut does not put money there. So we're going to beat it. We're going to talk about it. I don't know where it'll lead. I would hope that we could at least come up with a policy. So we'll see what that happens. That's for this year. Those are kind of things. I think that's plenty.
Thank you. I do have a question. Oh, Mr. Brown, go right ahead.
Just looking at the returns page, and this MSCI Emerging Markets, am I reading that right, where it's had a loss for 5 years straight?
The emerging markets, the Morgan Stanley, I think, I forget the CI stands for, but that, yeah. So 4.47 annualized, loss rate over 5 years. It's interesting is that if you look at that span, I think that a lot of that's being driven by sort of global reactions to capital, and also they've gotten stung really badly lately because many of them are linked indirectly to China. So they've had a real bad recent experience, which when you average it out over the 60 months, probably contributes to that 4.47, but yep, you're correct.
That's not quite. I think Mr. Brown's statement was that they've had a loss each of the last 5 years. This doesn't say that. This says that their average loss over the last 5 years, their average over the last 5 years is a loss. They could have had a gain 1 year and then a bigger loss the next year.
Fiscal year is down 17%, right?
That we're not in the index though. Our manager is First State. So for the past 5 years, we're actually up 2.78% on a CAGR basis.
Okay, right.
That's the index that they're measured against. Just like the Euro Pacific Fund is our other manager, and they are also they're emerging markets minus any U.S. exposure, but we've had great managers in that space, which is I think where managers can add value is in small cap and tough to analyze overseas companies, which is both those. So.
You all set, Mr. Brown? Thank you, Mr. Ray. Before you leave, quick question. What's the process? So we did a few years ago in our contracts implement defined contribution plans as opposed to defined benefit plans. So we have to contribute a certain amount, and as our auditor said, hey, once we contribute that amount, that's what the financial requirement of the town is. Who manages those investments for us, and who oversees and makes sure that we're providing the employees with the appropriate potential investment vehicles for those funds?
Actually, the HR department is the administrator of the plan. The plan is, well, I guess the sponsor, excuse me, I think the correct term is sponsor of the plan. And then the administrative plan is KERMA.
Is who?
KERMA. That's who the HR director determined to go with that time. It's actually one of the things I've been looking at, both from a fee perspective and as a vehicle for people.
Is that both the town and the Board of Education side?
Yes.
Okay, so, and the investment vehicle, who?
There's
picks the
basically,
investment?
there's a menu of investments that the individuals can participate with, and each individual selects their own,
Yeah, no, but
vehicle.
we have to provide them what those,
what the menu is.
what the menu
Correct.
is. We define
Right.
we define the
Right.
dinner,
We,
right?
right. Yeah, we define the menu, we negotiate the administrative rate with the carrier, if you want to call them a carrier, the administrator. And as I said, it's one of the things I'm looking at currently to try to reduce the cost to the employees of the plan.
Should this be, and not that you need any more, but should this be something that the investment board gets involved with on a basis of just helping determine what the investment options presented should be? Or should somebody be doing this? Yeah, go ahead. I don't have a firm view on it. I just raise it because those funds are going to grow more and more, and it's people's money.
Correct, and one of the, my own, this is a personal view, but that one of the downfalls of the 401k is that, it's self-administered, and it's difficult even for professionals, right, to
Yep.
stay on top. I mean, one of the great things of a defined benefit is you've got concerned individuals, fiduciaries that are looking out for you. And I will say, from a requirement standpoint, it's not really codified. It is, ERISA does not apply, but really what we're talking about here doesn't necessarily fall under ERISA rules anyway. It's that the most litigation you see is that, there wasn't an adequate selection of choices.
Right.
Proper advice was not given to the employees, and that the fee structure was too high. So that's not, it's not really an audit function, but I mean, if you put yourself open, the town open to liability if you have that.
Exactly.
We certainly, is something that we could, probably need to be codified somewhere, written, that it would be fall under our purview, but, be an annual sort of thing, be very easy for us to look at, because the fees, it's just, the data is out there. We could get that cross-section to make sure that the fees are in line with what other similar-sized funds are.
Right. The
And
investment
as far as
analysis.
the investment analysis, it's just really looking at the mix of funds and how they're sort of doing, just like we do with these. And
Exactly. Just to make sure that we're providing, that A, we're safeguarding the employees' money, B, we're giving them good investment options.
And participation rate, that'd be
And
something else
see
you'd
that
also
the
want to see. if
participation
people-
rate-
Are people actually using the thing? And if they're not, then it's pointing to some sort of problem somewhere.
Right,
You
which
know-
is the whole thing, although we're not based against ERISA, it's a good thing, having seen that.
We are
Trying
not, but
to-
the way that
trying
we're under
to-
the prudent, most states fall under the prudent man doctrine, which is, but that's the investment of funds, but I mean, it's very similar to ERISA, if you look at them side by side.
Plus, it's just the right thing to do.
I would, as somebody who lives here in town, I would hope that that's what we're doing for the employees.
Yeah, as I indicated, that's one of the things I'm currently working on. I'm more than happy to share that burden and that responsibility with the pension board, and we'll take that as, I think I heard the chair just accept that sharing of effort, so that's great. With respect to the participation rate, our plan has required participation, so everybody participates.
Well, then I guess we need to make sure that it's monitored nicely then.
Yeah,
Right.
totally agree. Yeah, and the right prices, et cetera, totally agree.
It'd be great for this board to get, Brian, if you're gonna look at it on an annual basis, it'd be great that, at least one of our quarterly meetings, we go through the OPEB, the pension, and then you just tell us, here's what we've done on the defined contribution plan. I just think it's incumbent upon us to make sure somebody's looking at it.
I would agree, it's a good idea.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Walsh.
Brian, just one quick question. In regards to the asset distribution, in regard to commodities, every time we look at it, it seems to be always in the negatives, in the double-digit negatives. In your field, is that expected to turn around, or is it just seems like for the last 5 years, at least here, but it just seems every time we look at this, it's always double-digit losses, basically.
No, we've talked about it because, it's a recent, I haven't had more than 2 years, right? I think we had Gresham maybe 2.5 years ago. They've generally done pretty well as a manager in that space. And the reason that it's in there, and it's not a very,
It's only 3%. I mean, I know it's not a lot.
I'm just checking to see if it's 3 or 2.
That's 3, yeah.
Is that it, oddly enough, and it's probably doing it because it's generally been marching the opposite way. In the long run, it actually reduces the volatility of the overall fund. So commodities, the nice thing about them, historically, is that they're not correlated to the equity and fixed income markets. And so they are most correlated with inflation, which we don't have a lot of built-in inflation protection, although, benefits are generally move with inflation over time. So those and tips are pretty much your only two asset classes you could, and some part of real estate would kind of help with that inflation aspect. So that's why the commodities are there. They've been getting pounded recently, sort of with global slowdown. We had China really pumped up that space by consuming everything that they could, and now we're seeing that sort of unwind. And then oil, lots of different things going on there, but it's also a supply-demand thing currently. We rebalanced, and I think it's a smart thing to do. We did talk whether there's other sort of ways to get the inflation, just kind of reduce volatility thing without commodities, and we decided to stay the course, if anything, and we did rebalance because it was like, it's just when you're most negative that the thing sort of snaps back and you bang yourself in the head and go, why do we try to be tactical? We're trying to be strategic here, so.
All right, thank you for the education.
All right, thank you very much again, Mr. Ray. Thank you for being here. I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back and do the town side, and we'll do the grants. Thank you.